Biomimicry. Let's take a deep dive with the Venus flower basket sea sponge, or under its scientific name, Euplectella aspergillum. We start with what is biomimicry? Well, it's how we as humans mimic or copy the design, process, or structure of biological entities and processes. That's how the airplane was created and how the gherkin in London was modeled. All right, the last one, well, it's not really that well known, but the large building was replicated on the Venus flower basket. From the opening of its windows to the thermal expansion and contraction of the building to the natural destratification of the air inside the building. While the Gherkin was built in 2001, it didn't exactly live up to the expectations of the architecture or the sponge it was modeled from. The Venus flower basket has been well known for the better part of the last century, and it's not uncommon to receive one of these sponges as a wedding gift in Japan. People like these gifts because of the glass like appearance that comes from the sponge and the rigid structure it has. The appearance of the flower basket, well, that's just the beginning of what we as humans are hoping to copy from it. The structure of the sponge is where the fascination really begins. The organism can expand and contract its skeletal structure, and this is done as it moves through the depths of the ocean without breaking apart. The sponge has a skeleton that, well, if you look at it under a microscope, it appears to be almost a checkerboard pattern, meaning that this thing isn't solid. It's not just a solid skeleton that we'd find in other organisms. The sponge is actually able to collapse completely upon itself, and it's not affected by the current or the pressure at of depths of up to 1,000 meters or approximately 3,280 feet. That's almost half a mile underwater. The pressures that we're talking about here, we're at 1,500 psi. This is crazy. These creatures only grow to be about 10 inches in length and often have small organisms that use their skeleton, because it's hollow, as almost a fortress of protection as the sponge moves with the ocean. Now, let's get to the meat of the information. With even those facts, you can see how there'd be many innovations coming from the correctly harvested information about these creatures. Well, outside of architecture, there have been many attempts, and many are ongoing concerning not just mechanical engineering, but the scientific world of physics, as we know it. The Venus flower basket is forcing many intelligent minds to think and test against known laws of hydrodynamics, aerodynamics, mathematics, and obviously material science. A famous study that has been done to study the skeletal structure of the sponge was conducted by Harvard. The team that was examining the sponge under a microscope, and they went and recreated the structure they found by 3D printing the patterns. These patterns were then tested against known physically sound lattice structural patterns, and the structure of the sponge was stronger in every single aspect of every single trial. Isn't that crazy? The intelligent folks here at Harvard then took their newly acquired information, or their data, and they used this as inputs into a simulation by a supercomputer to estimate the physiological changes as the sponge evolves. Well, they found that the load to weight ratio of the structural pattern began to increase and exceeded every pattern that they could try against it. Plus, we got to keep in mind that this sponge is continuously able to expand and contract upon itself. So it's getting to its smallest size and continuing that range to its largest size continuously within the currents of the ocean and these extreme depths and pressures. Now, the whole time, it's able to hold its rigidity and able to hold its form. Now, also keep in mind that yes, this is only one study that's been done, and it has to be replicated and it has to hold true across all continuous tests, but these results could change a large amount of our physical world. There are many implications, as I'm sure you well know, in the military sector, aviation, nautical operations, mechanical devices, structures such as roads or bridges, architecture, and possibly even chemistry as we learn more about this creature. Well, today we covered a brief intro into what biomimicry is and how the Venus flower basket sea sponge could change our lives. Again, I'm Joe Casebeer, and thanks for listening to the Most Significant Bit podcast.